The autumn wind of 2023 carried a brittle chill across the financial canyons of New York and the sprawling, sun-baked campuses of Silicon Valley. It wasn't merely a physical cold. It was the chilling realization of a prolonged tech winter, a period of agonizing recalibration, where the paper valuations of the previous decade dissolved faster than morning mist. The air was heavy with the scent of stale ambition and the faint metallic tang of fear, a fear that permeated every corner office where CEOs, once hailed as infallible prophets, now wrestled with layoffs, supply chain fractures, and the terrifying scrutiny of regulators. This was the atmosphere in which Judge Vance, CEO of Ethel Corp., thrived. Vance was not a visionary. He was an institutional pillar. His company specialized in high-margin, low-innovation enterprise software, the kind of essential boring plumbing that guaranteed steady dividends. Vance represented the old guard, perfectly tailored Italian wool, a perpetual tan acquired in Nantucket, and a voice honed by years of exclusive dinner circuits and carefully curated media appearances. He was the master of the subtle, contemptuous shrug. Vance had built his latter-day reputation on one specific, highly profitable pastime, criticizing Elon Musk. To Vance and his cohort, Musk was not merely a competitor. He was an existential threat. He was unpredictable, often messy, and crucially, he broke the established, comfortable rules of capital allocation and public discourse. Vance's attacks were often cloaked in the language of civic responsibility. Musk was unstable, a liability to shareholders, a child with too many expensive toys. These verbal skirmishes culminated in a high-stakes, closed-door deposition, scheduled in a drab, windowless conference room in the Federal District Court building, 3 miles from Wall Street. The room itself was a monument to bureaucratic permanence, deep green marble running along the baseboards, heavy mahogany tables scarred by decades of conflict, and the constant, almost deafening hum of an archaic HVAC system pushing overly chilled, recycled air. The only illumination came from cold fluorescent panels, which cast every face in a pale, unflattering glow, exaggerating every fatigue line and bead of sweat. Vance entered the room with the practiced confidence of a man who knows the house rules. He wore a Brioni suit that felt to the touch like liquid graphite. His demeanor was a finely tuned instrument of patronizing control. He brought with him 2 lawyers, Mr. Harrison, sharp, perpetually anxious, and Ms. Chen, silent and ruthlessly efficient, clutching a binder thick with hostile prepared questions regarding Musk's recent corporate restructuring and his perceived fiduciary irresponsibility. Musk arrived 10 minutes late, accompanied by only a single, quiet advisor. He wore an unremarkable dark suit that looked slightly too warm for the aggressive air conditioning. The contrast was immediate and jarring. Vance looked like a man built for the room. Musk looked like a man who had reluctantly paused building something important to attend to this necessary annoyance. The first 2 hours were a slow, agonizing grind of procedural sparring. Vance, though not directly cross-examining, constantly injected comments aimed at destabilizing Musk. Whenever Musk gave a straightforward, data-driven answer, Vance would lean back in his chair, cross his arms, and exhale audibly, making the sound a soft, dismissive weapon. Harrison, Vance's lead attorney, finally launched into the core of their attack, focusing on a recent decision by Musk to liquidate certain non-performing assets rapidly, a move Vance had publicly derided as reckless liquidation driven by ego. Mr. Musk, Harrison began, his voice dry and precise, the valuation of the liquidated subsidiary, Orion Data Services, was significantly depressed by the speed of the sale. This rushed transaction cost your shareholders, conservatively, $800 million in potential value. Do you dispute this accounting? Musk shifted his weight slightly, looking directly at the table's smooth, cool surface before lifting his gaze. His eyes, often described as possessing a piercing blue intensity, were currently flat, focused, and utterly devoid of hostility. He simply stated, I dispute the premise that the speed was detrimental. The rapid divestment was necessary to prevent deeper capital erosion stemming from unforeseen regulatory shifts that your firm, Ethel, failed to accurately model last quarter. We recognized the systemic risk. We acted. Vance, unable to contain himself, offered a stage whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. Regulatory shifts he caused, through sheer instability. Ms. Chen, sensing the shift in the room's temperature, quickly interjected a question about shareholder confidence, but Vance's contempt had now been fully unleashed. He took a sip of his lukewarm mineral water, the clink of the glass against the coaster echoing disproportionately in the sudden quiet. "Mr. Musk," Vance said, bypassing his own legal team entirely, adopting the tone of a weary mentor addressing a poorly performing pupil. "You often speak of efficiency and innovation, yet your history is littered with spectacular, expensive failures. Rockets blow up, prototypes catch fire. You treat the market not as a delicate ecosystem, but as a personal laboratory for your late-night whims. Where is the maturity? Where is the respect for the hundreds of thousands of people who rely on stable, predictable leadership?" Musk's internal monologue was a cascade of clinical assessment, not anger. Vance sees predictability as stability. I see predictability as stagnation. He confuses complexity with wisdom. He fundamentally misunderstands the physics of exponential growth. It is always messy. The man is not concerned with the long-term health of the ecosystem, only the quarterly return on his vested interest. The atmosphere became thick, almost viscous. The air conditioning continued its rhythmic assault, but nobody was cold. The stench of overbrewed coffee that had been sitting in the carafe since 8 a.m. suddenly seemed overwhelmingly present. Musk's composure, however, remained absolute. He merely adjusted his collar, a micro-movement that seemed to indicate deep internal patience. "Judge Vance," Musk replied, his voice measured, almost soft, but carrying the weight of undisputed authority. "I believe you confuse failure in the pursuit of transformation with malice. We can debate risk models all day, but the underlying metrics are simple. Is the long-term potential optimized? Is the trajectory toward a sustainable multi-generational future? Your business model, while predictable, is fundamentally brittle. It relies on the assumption that disruption can be contained. It cannot." Vance laughed, a short, explosive sound that was more of a scoff. It was the laugh of a man who believed his position was unassailable. "Brittle, you say? Mr. Musk, Ethel Corp has weathered 4 market corrections and 2 global recessions. We are the backbone. We are the structural integrity. Your transformation usually involves tweeting something inflammatory and watching your stock gyrate like a dying fish. I represent responsibility. You represent volatility." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany. The dark stain of the wood absorbed the harsh light, making the gesture seem heavy, permanent. "Frankly, Mr. Musk, your presence in the market is often a necessary inconvenience we must tolerate, like the sound of construction outside the window. Necessary, perhaps, but certainly distracting and highly inefficient." He let the silence hang there, savoring the moment of absolute psychological dominance. Harrison and Chen exchanged glances, slightly horrified by the CEO's recklessness, but confident in his rhetorical victory. The legal strategy was forgotten. This was now a primal display of corporate hierarchy. Musk did not react immediately. He took a full 10 seconds, a geological epoch in a deposition, to respond. During that silence, the only discernible sound was the low, electric thrum of the overhead lights and the slight involuntary tremor in Vance's left hand, hidden just below the table edge, a sign that even his performance was costing him energy. Musk's eyes scanned the room, settling finally on the court stenographer, who was typing furiously, capturing every syllable of Vance's arrogance. He then looked back at Vance, and for the first time, a microscopic change registered in his expression, not anger, but a profound, almost weary finality. "I appreciate your assessment, Judge Vance," Musk began. His tone was now shifting, becoming even lower, more resonant, the voice of someone delivering an unpleasant but unavoidable truth. "You speak of tolerance and structural integrity. You are correct that Ethel is the backbone of many enterprise operations. That is precisely why its leadership cannot be defined by stagnant thinking and personal animosity toward innovation." He paused again, deliberately slow, allowing the full implications of the next words to settle. Ms. Chen finally sensed the trap. Her eyes widened. She moved to interrupt, but it was too late. Musk reached into the internal pocket of his jacket and produced a single, neatly folded sheet of legal paper. He slid it across the table toward Vance. The paper made a soft, rasping sound against the smooth mahogany. I had intended to wait until the conclusion of these proceedings to file the required Schedule 13D, but given your vigorous defense of Ethel's structural integrity and the implication that I am merely a distracting inconvenience, I believe now is the moment for complete transparency. Vance glanced at the document. It was a standard SEC filing notification, but the figures were anything but standard. His face, moments ago flushed with self-satisfaction, instantly paled. The color drained away, leaving the fine network of capillaries visible near his temples. He stared at the section detailing the acquisition of controlling interest. "You will find," Musk continued, his voice absolutely steady, betraying no satisfaction, only clinical fact, that the shell companies and blind trusts we employed over the last 14 months have systematically acquired shares of Ethel Corp., focusing heavily on distressed institutional holdings that you and your board neglected to stabilize. Vance's mind was now a hurricane of disbelief. Impossible. We monitor every large block trade, every institutional shift. How could we have missed this? The arrogance, the blindness of the past hour suddenly felt like a physical weight crushing his lungs. His elegant posture collapsed slightly, his shoulders rounding as he gripped the edges of the paper. Harrison, the attorney, finally snatched the paper, his hands visibly shaking. He read the final line, his breath catching in a shallow gasp. Musk delivered the final devastating sentence, his gaze locked directly onto the now frozen features of Judge Vance. As of 4 a.m. this morning, Judge Vance, my collective entities, acting under the mandate of strategic restructuring and shareholder protection, the very responsibility you championed, now officially own 51% of Ethel Corporation. You are no longer the controlling interest. Your leadership and your philosophical rigidity are now subject to the immediate review of the majority shareholder. The room went absolutely, terrifyingly silent. The sound of the HVAC unit, previously a background drone, now seemed to scream into the void. Vance did not move. He did not speak. He was locked in a tableau of pure shock, his mouth slightly open, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the table, beyond the room. His mind was screaming the word volatility. He had mocked the architect of chaos, only to discover that chaos now owned his foundation. Harrison, the lead counsel, stammered, the practiced legal confidence evaporating from his voice. This is a hostile acquisition, Mr. Musk. This is unprecedented aggression." "Aggression?" Musk cut him off, his voice maintaining its dignified calm. "It is the market. You defined me as an inconvenience. I merely chose to permanently address the inefficiency. Your management, Judge Vance, prioritized rhetoric over operational security. My first action as the controlling shareholder will be to ensure Ethel's long-term viability by removing any management layers that confuse personal ego with fiduciary duty." Vance finally managed a choked noise, attempting to speak, but the words were trapped. A desperate, pathetic gurgle in his throat. He reached for his water glass but missed, his fingers glancing off the damp side of the glass. He froze in the realization that his hands were visibly trembling, a complete betrayal of the composed image he had cultivated for decades. Musk stood up slowly, a gesture of finality that did not require volume or threat. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. The movement was quiet, deliberate, and devastatingly efficient. "The proceedings concerning Ethel's management are now moot," Musk stated calmly to the stenographer. "We will reschedule this discussion for the newly formed board meeting next week. Judge Vance, you are, of course, invited to attend." He turned and walked toward the door. As he reached the exit, he paused, his hand resting lightly on the cold brass handle. He looked back at Vance, still paralyzed at the mahogany table, and offered a final, measured assessment. "When you spend so much time looking down on those attempting to build, Judge Vance, you fail to notice who is standing behind you, quietly laying the foundation for your replacement." Musk exited, leaving the conference room in the silent, suffocating aftermath of financial shockwave. The global earthquake, analyzing the fallout. The news hit the SEC wire an hour later, but the true detonation occurred when an anonymous source, likely one of the horrified attorneys present, leaked a transcript fragment and a shaky phone photo of Vance's shattered expression to a major financial news network. The reaction was instantaneous and cataclysmic. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was a philosophical declaration of war against the entrenched managerial class. The media reaction, a deluge of hyperbole and analysis. Within hours, the world's major news desks were scrambling. The Wall Street Journal ran the sober headline, "Musk's 51% strike, the quietest, costliest takeover in decades." Their analysis focused on the unprecedented sophistication of the stealth acquisition, noting that the layering of trusts required months of planning and billions in liquid capital, all orchestrated while Musk was publicly embroiled in unrelated controversies. The ultimate strategic distraction. Axios focused on the political angle. The end of the Vance era, a morality play for Silicon Valley's old guard. They framed it as a necessary cleansing, arguing that Vance's company, Ethel, had become symbolically fat and complacent, ripe for disruptive intervention. And then there was the internet. Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok exploded. The phrase 51% freeze immediately became a trending hashtag. The leaked image of Vance's stunned face was instantly memified, overlaid with captions ranging from, "When you realize you left the stove on," for your entire company, to "The moment the architect of chaos becomes the owner of your peace." The public debate was furious. Was this genius or pure predation? On one side, the supporters argued that Musk had simply played the game better. He took the intellectual high ground, focusing on data and long-term viability, while Vance was distracted by personal, petty ego battles. They cheered the dismantling of a perceived bully. "You play chess against a master. You don't talk trash," one highly liked comment read. On the other side, critics, many of whom were aligned with Vance's establishment views, cried foul, calling it corporate espionage disguised as strategic investment. Billions of dollars exchanged hands without a public bid, destabilizing thousands of small investors who depended on Ethel's stability. This was market ruthlessness in its purest form. The subplots, the ripple effect. The story was not confined to the halls of power. It reverberated across the entire economy, proving the interconnectedness of high finance and daily life. Consider Sarah Jenkins, a 48-year-old mother of two working the assembly line at a manufacturing plant in Youngstown, Ohio. Sarah wasn't sophisticated in SEC filings, but she knew one thing: her 401k had been bleeding value for 18 months. A significant portion was tied up in a mutual fund heavily invested in Ethel Corp., believing it to be a safe bet. Vance's predictable, low-growth strategy had slowly strangled the stock, causing agonizing fractional losses every quarter. Sarah had watched her retirement dreams shrink, worrying about college tuition. When the news broke, the market's reaction to Musk's takeover was a surge of optimistic volatility. The expectation of aggressive restructuring, of pruning the dead weight that Vance had allowed to flourish, sent Ethel's stock soaring by 22% in aftermarket trading. For Sarah, this was not abstract high finance. This was tangible relief. She looked at her phone later that evening, seeing the jump in her retirement account. It was the largest single-day gain she had seen in years. "He didn't do this for me," she reflected internally, leaning against the cold, worn cinder block wall of the break room, the smell of burnt popcorn lingering in the air. He did this because Vance was inefficient, but by prioritizing competence over politics, he stabilized something that was broken. He fixed the structural weakness that Vance was too proud to admit existed. Her relief, mirrored by thousands of other small, invisible investors, provided the moral counterweight to the critics crying, "Predation." Musk hadn't merely sought revenge. He had forced accountability, and the unintended byproduct was the stability of funds for countless ordinary workers. Why, the reflection, the legacy of dignity weeks turned into months. Vance was quickly and quietly removed from the board, accepting an immense severance package, a final, muted footnote to his career of loud self-importance. Ethel Corp was undergoing a radical surgical restructuring, focusing heavily on R&D, and shedding the layers of bureaucratic bloat that Vance had used to reward loyalty over talent. The lesson transcended the balance sheet. It was a profound study in the nature of true power and effective leadership. Judge Vance's downfall was rooted in his belief that volume equals strength. He confused aggressive rhetoric with actual substance. He spent his energy on criticizing the external world, convinced that if he talked loudly enough about his own structural integrity, the underlying rot wouldn't be noticed. His vengeance against Musk was attempted humiliation in a public forum. Elon Musk's response was the epitome of dignified silence. His power was not displayed in the volume of his voice, but in the certainty of his actions. He absorbed the insults, internalized the contempt, and focused his entire massive machinery on a single strategic objective. He did not seek to wound Vance personally. He sought to dismantle Vance's influence, the influence of stagnation and entitlement. This moment defined the principle that competence is the ultimate revenge. When someone seeks to drag you into the mud of their arguments, the most powerful response is to simply rise higher, making their ground irrelevant. Musk never lost his composure because he understood that the courtroom battle was merely a distraction from the real game he was playing, the slow, inexorable acquisition of the company itself. The silence that followed Musk's exit from the deposition room was more powerful than any shouting match, any aggressive counter-argument. It was the sound of a paper empire crumpling, exposed not by external attack, but by its own self-inflicted weakness. The incident serves as a permanent, chilling reminder for anyone in a position of authority. True leadership is not about managing perceptions. It is about owning the reality. When the market demands innovation and accountability, the comfortable certainty of the past is not a shield. It is a liability. You cannot mock the future when the future is quietly buying controlling interest in your present. The highest form of competitive triumph is achieving such overwhelming, undeniable success that your antagonists are rendered not merely defeated, but irrelevant. This quiet, strategic patience, focusing relentlessly on building and executing while others are focused on talking and tearing down, is the defining characteristic of transformative figures. The ultimate moral of the story is not about billions exchanged, but about the choice we make every day. Do we invest our energy in distraction and ego, or in quiet, strategic execution that benefits the ecosystem we operate within? The man who stayed calm, who focused on the numbers, didn't just win a fight. He improved the structural health of an entire corporation and, by extension, the lives of thousands of workers who were merely collateral damage in the war between stability and progress. The world needs more people like this. Share if you agree.